All right, so we're back. This is part 2 of the margin series. I'm going to scroll up here to number 16, and let's continue our discussion about margin. But this time, let's take a look at a short position and how what the margin looks like, and how the margin works for a short position. Okay, so number 16. So here's the basic idea. You short 1,000 shares of a given stock, XYZ, or whatever the problem says. Again, remember, I don't have my textbook with me, so you have to bear with me a little bit. You short 1,000 shares at a price of 40. Your initial margin is 50%. Now, the short side is a little bit different because it's actually a legal requirement that your initial margin on short sales must be 50%. And so I'll explain kind of how that works when we look at part A here on the right-hand side. But your margin has to be, well, actually, I guess now that I think about it, as I'm hearing myself explain this, it's actually no different. It just has to be at least 50%. It could be more than 50%. And so it's the same thing with a standard margin account. So it's kind of strike what I just said. There's really no difference between short margin and quote-unquote regular margin. So the price goes up from 40 to 50 in 1 year. And the stock pays a $2 dividend during that year. Okay, so the basic idea is we're going to try to work out what happened to your position, right, as we try to answer parts A, B, and C. So before we even get to it, I think starting out with these problems, and I think to really aid in your understanding of the material, whenever you're given a problem and you're given a set of information, one of the first things you want to understand and try to figure out, especially with these margin problems, is, all right, what did I want to have happen? What happened? And is that good or bad for me? Because that's going to really help you figure out, how to work these problems. And it will help you hopefully spot if you make a careless mistake, right? Like if you flip a negative sign or transpose a number. And, if you went into a problem thinking, yeah, I'm pretty sure this is a bad scenario for me, but you work out the math and it turns out to be a positive, you know that you probably made a mistake somewhere, right? This is exactly what I did when I learned this material, is that I would think very hard when I was given a problem, hey, what do I want to have happen? What is my objective here? What happened, and how do I feel about that, right? Is that a good outcome or a bad outcome for me? So let's go ahead and do that. Let's do that together. So I'm short 1,000 shares, and I shorted at 40, and now the price went up to 50. So what do I do when I short? Well, remember, you sell something you don't have, right? Now, you eventually have to buy that back and return those shares to your broker. So what do you want to have happen? Well, you want the price to go down so you can buy the shares lower than you sold them and return the shares and capture the profit, right? So you would love to short this stock at 40 and have this thing fall to 25 so you can buy the shares back at 25 and you capture a $15 per share gain. But in this example, the price actually increased by $10. It actually increased from 40 to 50. So you're going to feel some pain. So that is really helpful to understand as we begin trying to solve this problem. Okay, so you originally shorted 1,000 shares at $40. That $40,000 that you receive, you get $40,000 cash in your account. Now, you can't do anything with it necessarily, as we're going to talk about it here in a minute. But the term that we usually use in the world of trading and in the world of finance is those are the proceeds from the short sale. Okay? Now, remember, you are required to have at least initial margin of 50%. And this problem told us that you had an initial margin of 50%. Here's basically what that means. If you shorted $40,000 worth of stock, you have to remember, so let's kind of foreshadow where we're going next. Is this an asset or a liability for you right now? I'm going to pause for a second and think about that. See if you can figure out the answer to that before I tell you what the answer is. This these $40,000 of proceeds that you have received from shorting this stock, is this an asset or a liability? If you said liability, then you were absolutely correct. That's a liability because remember, you have to return that stock, right? So this is a liability. So this is essentially what you're margining, so to speak. So you've got to post 50% of that in your account in the form of cash or UST bills, right? So you got to post $20,000 in cold hard cash in order to short this stock in the first place. And the reason why the broker is going to do that is, again, he doesn't want you taking all this cash and heading for the hills, right? You need to have some skin in the game. So there's the skin that's required to be in this game. Okay, now, next, we're going to figure out what the new margin on the stock is after the stock price increases from 40 to 50. Okay? Now, it's all going to be right down here. So let's work through each piece of this. But remember, this is the critical part. The whole thing comes back to this equation. The whole thing comes back to the simple relationship that your margin at any given time is always equal to your equity divided by the stock's value. Okay? All right. So let's work through each piece of this numerator. It's going to be these four pieces that you see my cursor kind of moving to. All right? And I'm going to follow this process. I'm going to follow a procedure that was exactly like the one I did in problem number 23. I'm going to figure out what my assets are. I'm going to add those together. I'm going to figure out what my liabilities are. I'm going to subtract those from my assets. And that's going to be my equity. Okay. So here's the first thing. Your first piece of equity, your first asset, we'll get to the equity in a second. Your first asset is the cash that you receive from shorting the stock. So the proceeds, whatever they are indeed an asset to you. So in this case, we received $40,000 in proceeds. Boom, that's an asset. Okay, the next asset you have is obviously going to be the initial margin that you had to post to get this thing off the ground in the first place. To establish this short position, again, your broker required the posting of an initial margin in the form of cash or UST bills. That is an asset. That is yours. So these are your two assets. Okay? All right. Now, what is this $50,000? Okay. This is, as you see this arrow that says new stock value. All right. Here's what you need to remember. You shorted this stock, right? The stock itself is a liability to you, correct? Therefore, the value of the stock at any given point in time represents the value of that liability that you must repay. All right? So since the stock increased from 40 to 50, that means the total value of that stock position, the total value of your liability, or of one piece of your liabilities, is $50,000. The 1,000 shares that you shorted that are currently selling for $50 a piece, $50,000. Okay, now the next piece of this numerator is something that I expect you guys to pick up from your reading, but this will kind of help nudge you in that direction. When you are short, if a stock pays a dividend, you have to pay that dividend. It's crazy, right? Think back, to what you learned in 670 or 311 or 680, right? I know it was covered in all three of those classes. If I own a stock and that stock pays a dividend, boom, you get cash money. You get a check in the mail. You get cash in your brokerage account. That's how the financial system works. Well, if you want to short a stock and that stock happens to pay a dividend, while you are short, you are on the hook for that dividend. You could call it, a disincentive to shorting. It's one of the costs of short selling. So, if I'm short 1,000 shares and it pays a dividend of $2, then my total liability is $2,000, right? So all four of these pieces work together: asset, liability, to give you your equity. Okay, which I believe this works out to be $8,000. So your new equity in the position is $8,000 divided by the stock value, right? Still the same. It's going to be still the same in the margin equation. It's going to be $50,000. So $8,000 divided by $50,000 is 16%. So will you receive a margin call? Yes. The maintenance margin in the problem was given at 30%. In fact, you would have received a margin call way before this, right? You probably would have gotten a margin call around 47 or 48, something like that. You can solve for it using this, the same concepts and tools that you learned in number 23. Now, what about part C? What is the overall return on your investment? Well, to find the return on your investment, you're going to take your ending equity minus your beginning equity divided by your beginning equity, right? Remember, the only equity you had in the beginning was your initial margin of $20,000, right? Because remember, this was a lot, if you work out, this was the only equity you had in the beginning because this is a liability, right? And so this is not a part of your equity, right? And so if you were to solve for this initial margin at the beginning in the same way we did right here, you would see that your initial equity works out to be $20,000. Your I kind of had this flipped around. That's your beginning equity, right? That's the second piece of this. Your ending equity is the $8,000 that we just solved for. So again, I think I may have mixed up my words a little bit. So just to recap, your ending equity is the $8,000 that we found right here. Your beginning equity was the $20,000 in initial margin that you posted. So when you go to solve for your rate of return, it's just ending minus beginning divided by beginning, which gives you minus 60%. Again, a very long video, I understand that, but I also understand we didn't cover any of this in class, and so I really wanted to do my very best to give you guys, the best possible chance to succeed in this class, and the best possible chance to really understand this material really, really, really well. And so I hope this was helpful for you guys, and I'll see you guys next time.